Thank you. Thank you very much for your introduction and welcome everybody. It's lovely to be here at the Ikon and in the midst of this beautiful Hugh Locke exhibition and the Migrant Festival. So after this talk, there's going to be a screening of a film called The Last Angel of History, which touches on themes that we're going to explore between the three of us just now. And they're themes which both Gary and Trevor have been intimately engaged with, as they're kind of at the intersection of art, music, technology, and questions around race. These two gentlemen are pioneers and very, very important artists who've made a very important intellectual and artistic contribution to both sound and artistic practice in this country. And I want to start by asking you each to say a little bit about your journey through sound, music and technology. So Gary, perhaps you could kick us off.
Yeah, sure. Okay, it's great to be here. So as you've heard, I grew up in Balsall Heath here. Went to Moseley Art School with Keith Piper, amongst other people. Went from there to Trent Poly to study electronics and computing. And I think that already gives you a sense of somebody who, whilst having a kind of artistic background, was also deeply passionate about technology at that time as well. In a sense, it was almost felt like ambiguous or a conflict, how to reconcile the two things. Having studied computing and electronics at Trent, I then came back to to West Midlands, started working at Jubilee Arts, having been awarded with the Gulbenkian Foundation Award for a year, which was awarded to 5 artists around the country. And at that time was then sort of like at Jubilee developing work around tape slide production, experimental photography and sound. Went from there to the arts technology, Artec, I'll speed up, Gilane, don't worry, in 1990, with the kind of emergence of sort of like desktop publishing and that kind of stuff, to a centre had been set up to explore the creative applications of computers, and was there until 1995, when I then went to the Institute of International Visual Arts, INNOVA, to be head of multimedia, which I left after 15 years and went freelance. And I'll leave it at that for now, because I think other things will emerge.
They will.
Mine is not as interesting.
It's yours.
Born in Walthamstow, London, went to Waltham Forest College of Art, applied to go to Sir John Cass, Royal Academy, got rejected, so ended up in Portsmouth. Done my 3 years in Portsmouth, and then came back, year out, done a year at Chelsea. But in the 3 years being in Portsmouth, it was with like John, Lena, Avril, Reese, Eddie, Claire, was the founding group of Black Audio Film Collective. So that was, I had a course, two courses, the course I was officially on, and the course that I had with these other people, which extended my range of possible things I could do with the practice I was in. So that was that bit. So we come back up to London, we set up Black Audio Film Collective and started the process of we tried to make a film before, but we was going to make a film, but we didn't have enough money, so we worked on the tape slide, so we made the tape slide as our first 2 projects, and then later on the riots kicked off, and then we went full steam into making Andrew songs. So yeah, and then I met Mr. Stewart, and then the rest is history.
You should have said Signs of Empire.
Oh, yeah, Signs of Empire.
Yeah,
Signs of Empire.
It's very important tape slide production.
So, you wanted to say something about how you both met. And I want you just to hear the journeys, because I think it's really important to understand the journeys which both Trevor and Eddie have taken before we kind of come back into a conversation about The Last Angel of History and some of the key themes of that film.
Sure. Yeah, go on, Mike, Gary. So I was working at Jubilee. I've got to make this really quick. It's so difficult to kind of describe this in a way. Let's just imagine at the moment right now that if you guys want to record something and edit some sound, you can just do that on your phone in like a matter of seconds, can't you? Yeah. And indeed, not only can you kind of record it, you can also visualize it and perhaps edit it and do whatever. Okay, take yourself back, wind back to basically 1988, 89, and Jubilee Arts was awarded with some money, and we could, from the an underspend from the council, and amongst all the different workers there, I pitched in and said, let's go digital. Now, it may seem patently obvious now that should be a thing to do, but you've got to take yourself back to the context of a kind of community arts centre which is doing work, and there's this emerging technology, but there's uncertainty about what this actually means. Anyway, quickly, went to a store to buy this thing called Sound Tools. Now, Sound Tools was a card which enabled your computer to record sound. It cost £5,000. I'm not making this up. This is just the card. Let's not even go to how much the computer costs and everything else. It's an extraordinary amount of money. And in a sense, this is important because it's not just a sort of like the craziness on my part, but also Sylvia King, who was the director, and the whole of Jubilee, who embarked on this journey with me to do that. Anyway, quickly, bought this thing, which I was reliably told from the store Palm Audio was the one directly after Peter Gabriel at Real World Studio, because you can imagine nobody could buy this thing. Installed it. Now, Trevor had come up to use the studio that I worked in at Jubilee Arts, because
we had a mutual friend, Pervez.
Yeah, because we had a mutual friend, Pervez Khan, who worked at Wide Angle here in terms of film. And I showed Trevor this machine which enabled you to visualize the waveform and cut and edit it in a non-destructive way. And you can imagine somebody who, I mean, he's a really modest person, but who already had developed quite extraordinary capacity and skills in terms of editing on tape. Yeah. He was absolutely mesmerized.
I lost it then, because I realized because before I was using cassettes, making, you could, answer phone. You used to get the answer phone cassettes, which are like 3-minute, 6-minute loops. So you was able to record like a perfect, or even minute-long answer phone loop. So you could make a perfect recording, and it made it seamless. So we had a pile of these things. Then, when Gary said we can see the waveform, and that means you could actually get into seeing where the cut should be. And it changed it for me, literally changed, because it meant that you could actually store more information, get even more precise loops and patterns, and it threw up the possibility of different kinds of sounds that you could get out of the technology. I was excited, but I didn't have 5K to actually play around.
So we've heard your journey getting to work with sound and technology, and the film, and Handsworth Songs is probably one of the most famous films that Black Audio Film Collective made, filmed here in Birmingham during the riots. But the film you're going to see after this talk is called The Last Angel of History, and it starts with a narration about the legend that in the 1930s, the itinerant bluesman Robert Johnson sold his soul to the devil in order to play the blues. And what Johnson got in return for his soul was a black secret technology which would produce the history of black music. And then the film launches into this extraordinary journey that starts with George Clinton, Parliament and the album Mothership, and moves through techno and jungle via Afrofuturism. So I just wonder if you could, Gary, perhaps if you could start by talking about what was particular about those artists and that move through from Parliament, Afrofuturism and techno and jungle.
Yeah, of course. again, I'll try and make this brief because I could go on forever about this, but basically, I was 13 or 14 when my older sister took me to the Odeon on Odeon Cinema has to see basically Parliament play, and I remember when there was that flash of light and the mothership connection. The mothership just emerged from the cloud, and to this day, I believe it really happened. And George Clinton descended down those steps. I mean, you know, this sense of, and it is related to what we're talking about here, this sense of not being defined in very particular kind of didactic and literal ways in terms of who you are and what you are in your imagination. My entire kind of like mind exploded. I mean, you know, like I'm a lad from Balsall Heath, and a sense of possibilities was just extraordinary. And it also happened at a time which was shortly after this sort of sense of feeling confident about, you know, this whole sense of the emergence of black confidence about in yourself, kind of, do you remember MPLA, Nutty going on a holiday, all these seminal tracks. So at one point you were derided for being black, and then the next moment we could walk down the road quite proudly, if you see what I mean. But, you know, the mothership connection, this other world, you know, is just absolutely amazing. So, what was the question again, Gilane?
No, that's good. That's good.
Because then I'll just rope it in, and then we can.
That's good.
That's right,
because
yeah.
what I just want to get to is this idea that this marks a sort of moment where, instead of looking at representations from the past in terms of black experience, and you said it, there's a sense of possibility and of the future.
Imagining the future, yeah.
And
Which
it's
is
unscripted.
Yeah.
I mean, this is what was extraordinary about it as well.
But anything was possible in that sense. You wasn't limited by a particular sonic framework that is drawn up from some historical points or some school of lessons. You know, this is how you play a violin, this is what you should expect to get out of a violin. It's the idea you can make new sounds, and it was in service of your own experience or a new experience, and it was funky, it was tight. People liked to dance to it, or people used to just, you know, you could. It's another way of being, and it is open. I think it is.
So, what was the nature of the innovation sonically? If you could take
For
us,
me,
Eddie, through those kind of three phases and just
I think
describe that.
Well, electricity, definitely, amplification, and effects, and then you could either go into Moog, the synthesizer, is another big sort of technological shift that added a new voice that was enabling other people to sort of mutate the sound or extend the sound in another way, but put it in the service of a very tight bass line or some sound that you wouldn't have imagined coming out of somebody's voice or using a vocoder. So that to me would have been the series of things, but it's in the hands of quite crazy people that it became like a sonic chant. Because most of these characters, even like from Sun Ra to George Clinton, even Lee Perry, they're slightly not mad, but they're different kinds of. They come from a different sort of mindset with a strong will. Then, so that even when you think about in another way, fella, again, similar sort of instruments, but they're getting a different kind of quality, but using the voice. So yeah, that's what I want to say.
I think it's really important what Trevor's saying there. In addition to that, there's this sense of extraordinary risk-taking as well. I mean, these are really accomplished musicians who they could follow a particular trajectory, but they're not going there. They're exploring new kind of like sonic territory. You know, it's a different kind of canvas, so to speak. And so they're applying a different sense of who they can be and how their audiences can connect to what they're talking about as well. And also, it's not, you know, the stuff that Trevor's talking about in terms of the instrumentation. I mean, there's also a sense of it's not about just reproducing existing known kind of instruments in a way electronically, but creating new tonalities and gestures and emotions You see what I mean? It's almost like opening up a sonic portal to an entirely different place. And
that's perfect segue for me, because I think it's George
Okay.
Clinton in the film who says that he, because there's this image of the mothership, which is obviously an image of kind of science fiction, and there's a kind of mashup actually between sort of ancient Egyptian iconography and the kind of futuristic idea of, another planet or another life space zone. But I think it's George Clinton who says that he wanted to sort of imagine a space that people didn't expect to see black people. And in a sense, I think that's what you're both saying about the music, that it's exploration and experimentation with music and sound, which is going into a new place that hasn't yet been imagined. So that completely twists the idea of exploration. We have this idea of the exploration of Africa being this space which is constantly being explored and uncovered through the white gaze, But here, this is being completely inverted.
This is under our own control again. There's only the other bit I was just thinking is usually either in films or in some films, usually the black person gets killed within, first couple of minutes. At least in these versions, we live to see the end of the movie. It's the idea that
an alien, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Or he gets, and he was going to deal with that alien, I mean, the trajectory of that narrative really annoyed me. For those for those who know the film, if you see what I mean, in the lift scene, and it's just about anyway.
And Predator.
So the narrator through the Last Angel film is called the Data Thief, and he's sort of a character who's in search of information and data in digital form or in photographic form, and he's collecting all these fragments and memories. And at one point, I think he finds a stone, and on it is written, "The line between social reality and science fiction is an optical illusion." And I think there's a notion here which is explored in the film about how actually, there is this blurring between real life and science fiction. And there's a great example of it where Nichelle Nichols, who plays Lieutenant Uhura in Star Trek, the famous Uhura, the multiracial kiss, which you said we have to remember that it was done under a kind of...
Under duress.
Under duress.
Because when people say, they cite that, they always go, oh yeah, that kiss, where they kind of kiss. You've got to remember that they were only able to do that because it was framed in the context of, the alien force was forcing them to kiss. You see, there's another layer. Carry on, Gilane.
The other story is that they wanted to cut that bit, and that... Anyway, we won't go into that. The point is that reality and fiction blur because Uhura is then recruited to actually recruit African Americans to the NASA space program. And so there's this merger, but there's another point in which there's this kind of blurring, which is that, I think it's Greg Tate in the film, talks about how actually, when we're talking about science fiction, we're talking about the Black American experience, because, there's abduction, there are people abducted, slavery, there's genetic mutation, which is what happens, when peoples are transported the other side of the globe, and that the actual experience of being a black person, and maybe you could talk about whether you think this applies here in the UK as well as in the US, is one of being alienated and dislocated. So in a sense, science fiction is the perfect medium, as it were, or the narrative framework.
Well, you're framed as alien. You're not felt. It's difficult to feel present, apart. You was alien to the environment, and not. Even our royal family are now dealing with the realities of alien abduction. I don't know. This is the idea. It's just made to feel this isn't the national interest is not in your interest. You have no part of it. So as this Labour, the Conservatives will be fighting over Brexit, it's seen as like we are on the periphery of that. We are. It's like we don't matter. We're not feeling we're a part of this global or this society again.
The writer and cultural critic Ishmael Reed says in the film that until the 19th century, African Americans were not allowed to participate in 4th of July. So there was very much sense that actually it was a literal reality that Black Americans were excluded from the narrative of the nation. Gary, did you want to say anything about this?
Only in so much as there's a sense of maybe I'm reading in between the lines in the film of identity transfer. The whole thing about the worry on the part of there was that period, almost like a reflection on that period in the sort of like early 50s when there were those films that were about like Watermelon Man and stuff like this, where basically the great concern was if you woke up and in the body of somebody else, and that would lead you to literal madness. If you see what I mean? And so the sense of data thieves and where does the code and the DNA code reside, and anxiety and
about racial miscegenation.
Exactly, if you see what I mean. And I think that's really fascinating.
Because that's the argument that people are afraid that they're losing their souls, losing themselves by
and
this.
How you're defined.
Yeah.
Yep.
Trevor, can you talk a little bit about the making of the film, because you created the sound for it, and about how the film came about?
I can tell you about the things I wasn't able to do in the film, or weren't supposed
Those
to
are
do.
always interesting. Yeah, go on.
Because there were so many masters already inside the film, because it's a music piece, the job was not to try and compete with that.
Sure.
So it's like John said, don't bother trying to do it. It's not worth it. So there was space to actually make another sound that was the sound of the sonic gas that filled the room. The tone of the overall piece will be made by these sort of micro elements. So that was the job, was actually to make those pieces and not trying to compete with each of the musicians, because elements of the music will be passed through the film as well. So that was the key thing that I've tried to keep doing for all the other stuff, is don't compete with the other music. Do something slightly different that adds a tone and atmosphere that goes along with the narrative.
And what's the significance, do you think, of this film in the context of Black Audio Film Collective's oeuvre?
It's sort of like it's in the name, because we are black and we're interested in audio, we make films. So it was one way of actually bringing together all of the key influences, or some of the key influences on our musical interests and artistic interests as well, because these are masters in their own right of creativity. They position themselves in the epicenter of great works, visionary works, even, if you want to say. Because even the Johnson, the idea was that he couldn't play before. He wasn't that good a musician. Then he went away, and then the idea is he came back, and the argument is that the devil had taught him, and that's how comes it. It's like then after that he was like.
Can I add something? Because Trevor's underplaying it. It's a work of genius. I hope you got all that anyway. Because the things that we take for granted today in terms of like field recordings and the way that the textures and layers are used in again, a non-didactic, literal way that, sound is created in there. Trevor's like doing well in advance. I can only think of somebody like Walter Murch, who did The Conversation and other stuff like that, who I can say, you just kind of say it like, well, I just woke up that morning and thought I'd just knock together a little soundtrack for the songs.
It usually works like you wake up and you start the day. But no, it's good because it's
good. But can I ask you, if you don't mind, quickly? if it doesn't deter it too much. Some of the kind of like groundbreaking ways that you were making the soundtrack in there, and things like your use of the whales and all that kind of stuff, you know what I mean, and stretching out the sound and all that kind of stuff. What inspired you to do that? Where did that come from? Was it a moment of epiphany, or what was the process?
Used to go to like Test Department and some of those Cannes, some of these other musicians. And I thought,
these are groups, experimental group, German groups.
Yeah, it's just nice to see. Oh, you can do that with that. So what happens if you put that with this? So it's like like collecting Lego bricks and seeing the different combinations. And it was just saying, if it's okay for you to do that, it's okay for us to do it as well. And in conversation, talking with John and Eddie and Reese, it's like we have the right to do it, and it's our choice. It's liberating to be able to not to be, restricted.
That's an important point there, because it's at a point when even in terms of like music concrete and all that kind of stuff, people weren't associating people of color working in those ways, if you see what I mean. So I think that's really crucial.
Yeah, it's that thing where, like LeBain said today, said that when they said that there weren't any black artists, or the idea of there's no black artists kind of thing. When in a similar way, there's no black avant-garde musicians, because we used to go to London Filmmakers Co-op to transfer black and white film, and you just sort of. They weren't unfriendly, but it wasn't like a warm embrace. Sort of, okay.
I'd like to pick up on this idea of a black avant-garde and also talk a bit about the significance of place. Because again, in the film, when they're talking about Detroit techno, there's a discussion about the significance and importance of Detroit as a decaying industrial space that almost, the push to transcend this space and create something entirely new and revolutionary in terms of music. It's almost as if that location and that space was essential for that experimentation and innovation to happen. I wonder if you could talk about Birmingham and London as spaces for cultural experimentation and the nature of the kind of multicultural city as a context.
I think there's in the city, there's loads of little islands or small spaces where people are making their own music or working on their own art practice. And it's in isolation from the rest of the bigger city in that sense, but people are making or discovering their own voice. And again, I guess it's up until you meet up with other people and say, well, I can build a bass line, or if you strip this track down, you have the essence of the strength, and then it's been made into a new sound. Or I don't know. I think it is the weird combinations of people and space that makes an interesting movement or conditions
for that movement.
Yeah.
Harry?
Yeah, I almost feel like playing devil's advocate, but I need to support it if I do so. If I say it just seems a bit too easy to just simply, I'm not saying you suggest that, but just suggest that, the urban condition and that of being in a city, that's sort of like means that a particular kind of avant-garde, new frontier type.
So what are your examples
I don't
then
know.
of outside the urban space?
I know, that's what I'm saying. I'm really setting myself up for failure now. Because I suppose I'm saying that because in the film, I can't remember the film in detail, but I do know that I kind of liked the way that is it a guy called Gerald and Kevin Saunders one day when they're both saying different things about why they're calling it jungle, why they're calling it
they
breakbeats, you know what I mean? They kind of disagree, you know what I mean? And that for me is really healthy, there's a kind of sense of, it's not all moving to some kind of a convergent one way of doing something. I'm not even suggesting that you said that, it's just that I just get
But I think it's interesting that you both collaborate, and Black Audio Film
Yeah.
Collective is a collaboration of individuals, and we all know that actually working collaboratively is a lot harder than working on your own, because you're constantly having to negotiate difference, actually, different view, different perspective, different way of understanding what the final outcome should be. But there has to be that negotiation of difference in order to get to the final
But it
artwork.
sometimes makes it better though, by having that extra set of ears, extra eyes, so you don't miss anything. You know, if you're on your own, you may miss that, or may not be able to attune yourself for the change. Or so that's, in some senses, that to me, that I find that as a benefit. But then I don't do that much anyway, so it's
Okay, I'm going to open this up to our audience. Does anyone have any questions? Peter.
Thank you all for a really fascinating conversation. It could go on. Go on. I was thinking back to what you were saying, Trevor, about this idea of the avant-garde. You kind of start to talk about that. And my thought was because you were saying that when you went with your films and they were kind of like, these guys are doing what they're doing. And I was thinking about that, why people surprised, and then sometimes, and I mean in terms of, white people are surprised, and then sometimes black people are surprised at when people are doing, these avant-garde moves. Then, because then it made me think about how, when Trevor Mathison talks about that kind of mixed aesthetic of assemblage, which comes from the African tradition of, craft and make and do, bring all these different objects to create something new. Yeah. That's abstract. And then you think of something like Frank Boland that's showing that and his journey in abstraction and how difficult he found to make that journey. So that's my question is about why are people surprised about that idea that black people can't be abstract, avant-garde, and different?
because the dominant image is that you're supposed to represent the real. You're not abstract. You're supposed to be the statistic on the street kind of thing. So you're not supposed to represent the unusual, the surreal. So you have to be grounded in. So it's limiting one's range of what one can be, but there's a fixed kind of idea. Well, you fit in this box. That's what you're supposed to be doing. And outside you leave that to us to sort of go on. That's
Yeah, and a lot of it's to do with really boring stuff like it's fine as long as you're not a threat, if you see what I mean. Or the other way around, when I remember when Jeremy Della was lauded for the kind of like the acid brass band piece of work, and I thought to myself, well, that way of working is something that I'm familiar with, and certainly the people around me and the people for years and years. But unless it's framed or defined, validated by a particular kind of like, within the art canon, then somehow it's not real or valid. It's a bit annoying, really.
Just to add to that, I mean, one of the things that I was talking about yesterday was actually in the context of Frank Bowling's work, and about how, Frank Bowling, but also the writers Wilson Harris and Derek Walcott, actually one of the extraordinary and brilliant things about their work, literature, I can add Aubrey Williams to this as well, that's absolutely brilliant and groundbreaking, is that they take an established structure, either of literature or in painting, deconstruct it and reconstruct something entirely new. And Wilson Harris, I think, talks about that very much in terms of the Caribbean experience and the nature of that space as a space which is one which, of course, is born of slavery and trauma and violence, but nonetheless has been one in which it's also enabled and facilitated the possibility of new languages in different fields, whether that be literature or in fine art. Do we have any other questions? Yes, gentleman at the back there. Would you wait for the microphone? Thanks.
You might have addressed this already from this at the very beginning of this talk, but I'm curious, much like movements like the Harlem Renaissance or whatever, it's kind of the benefit of hindsight that people look back and go, this was really culturally significant. We're kind of following on from Ian's question as well. Were you aware at the time that you were charting new territory, creating avant-garde work as black artists, or were you just compelled by the desire to work together and then look back and go, wow, that was some really
I think we was compelled just to make stuff. Only down the line you think, yeah. Or when you see the work outside of this space or in another space and see people's responses, and by their surprise, because you've been living with this thing for so long, and you sort of know where it's going. The tape slide was the key thing, because we was able to sort of deconstruct the monuments and put our own narratives woven into it, and then take time and let it breathe and put some low sub-bass signal underneath there, and you can feel the and Wagner, he's got some issues, but some he's got some tunes. Yes, in the context of Viola, it's okay. Yeah, I think it, so. That had that kind of juxtaposition, and I thought, yeah, because the tape slide, we literally were doing it manually, because we had a dissolve unit, but it kept leaving like a tone on the track, so the sync was rubbish. So we had to remix the track again and play it live, and it was each project was 4 carousels, so there's a changeover halfway through. So we had to do it manually. So then you're doing the pace. Oh, okay, now, and then the image slowly dissolves. And there's this moment where the image becomes translucent and ghostly, and then it's like somebody's hand sort of coming out. It was fucking lovely.
Wait, this is being filmed, Trevor.
Sorry.
I have to have an only over 18s now.
Press the button.
Gary, would you like to?
So this last bit, it was, that to me was the bit when I realised this is really, because sonically it was doing something, and visually you've been taken on this both two, like the Image of Nationality and Signs of Empire. You've taken on a deep journey that we've been sort of struggling with to find a way of representing these ideas, and it was the perfect form for us. So.
I thought it was really good, Trevor. In answer to your question, but also following on from that, I mean, 2 points. One is, I think one illustrates why Trevor and I work really well together, and that is, so while he was doing those tape slide productions, I was also doing tape slide productions with Banner Theatre here, and Strange Fruit Theatre in Nottingham, and Rock and Roll Jordan, similarly using 2 dissolve units, but playing them live, if you see what I mean. And embracing all the mistakes. So when it would go out of sync or whatever, to me it was just part of the performance, if you see what I mean, in it. And I just learned through that process to enjoy and to embrace the mistakes, so to speak, and to use that as part of the performative thing. And then the other thing is, it's a good question, is it's no coincidence that together Trevor and I, for over like 13 years, have been working as Dubmorphology, and that we, in terms of our description of the group, talk about it in terms of being a research laboratory, because when we formed the group, it was because even those so-called avant-garde experimental spaces did not afford us the opportunities to really kind of like express ourselves. And that's quite extraordinary when you consider the kind of work that we were both doing, if you see what I mean. And yet we still had to do that for ourselves, to be proactive. So yeah, and it wouldn't surprise me if to this day, Mr. Kinch, if that is still the case, you'd have to tell us. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it is a case of like happening on things, you know, through trial and error, and embracing, accepting, and expecting. Time will tell.
And environments for experimentation and expression, are there there?
Contracting and new ones are emerging based on the depth of obvious ones, creates opportunity for new ones. So I'm not going to be an naysayer because maybe even just 5-6 years ago I was thinking, oh, where's all the new jazz going to come from in the UK? And look, there's this cornucopia of great music. So, yeah.
I think an important thing to recognise, you said about Harlem Renaissance being recognised. It is recognised, but when I was at Innova and we did a show at the Hayward Gallery, one of the big battles we had was about the press release, because they wanted to talk about the Harlem Renaissance as a really important moment in terms of Black American art history. And we said, no, this is an important moment in art history. And I think that's really important. I think you were referring to it, Gary. I think it's really important to recognise that, the kind of avant-garde experimental work we're talking about has had a huge impact on mainstream cultural production, and it's often that we don't see the trajectory of those influences, and the evidence of it, because it's not articulated or described.
And it's what so-called evidence isn't there.
Yeah. Yes. Okay, I think we've got time for one last quick question. Anyone got a burning question?
Hi, I'd like to come back to the question about Los Angeles history and where it fits in the work produced by Los.
Yes, he avoided that question, didn't he?
And I think when I saw that for the first time,
1995, yeah.
I was struck by a shift in colour and tone, visual colour and sonic colour. And I'm aware that actually back when we were Smith was a very large collection of a lot of different people. And if I think back to the early work, I wonder if some of the concerns about colonialism, race and empire became dominant themes. But then by the mid-90s, when there are others younger in the collective that are moving you towards looking at the futurism and looking at the place of Black people within that. So were there particular elements within the collective that brought forward something like nothing?
No.
Eddie, you could be a bit more generous in your response, I feel.
I think it's like the different funding bodies, because if I remember correctly, that one may have been ZDF, may have. So they have, and it's again, some things are either for TV and some things are for cinema.
Yeah.
So that would say what was being made, I would have said, or some things would directly go out to TV or to cinema. So there's that kind of dynamics.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you so much, Gary. Thank you very much, Trevor. Thank you all very much for being here.
Thank you, Gilane. Thank you, Gilane. Thank you. Thanks for being patient with us. I just want to say thank you, Gilane, but it's all right. It's all right. Because she's going to run off.